Hey, this is Ryan with Goodwin Racing. We're going to talk about cooling mods for your 2016 MX5. Now, we love the NDs, and when they came out, we started testing them, and we started to find, they're amazing at certain things, and then there's a few things that they can use a little bit of help on, and that's where we come in. So one of those areas is cooling. And when we started testing these cars, we discovered very quickly that really with any kind of enthusiastic type of driving, anything aggressive where you're spending a good amount of time actually pushing the engine and using it, autocross, track use obviously, but even just going through the canyons, you will quickly find that the oil temperature starts to skyrocket. And we're seeing temperatures, on track, we're close to 300 degrees. Even in an autocross, we're seeing like 250, 260, and that's Fahrenheit, of course. But that's way too hot for oil. We'd really like to be a lot lower than that. And so an oil cooler was something that we quickly discovered was really important to have on anything that's being used that way. So that's where the oil cooler comes in. Now this is a Mishimoto kit that is a 19-row oil cooler. The cooler itself is available in black or silver, depending on your preference. But this is really critical to keep the engine oil temperature in the happy range. Now this is a comprehensive kit. It includes pre-made lines to the lengths that you need. It includes brackets. And most importantly, a really nice thermostatic sandwich plate. Now this fits between the engine and the oil filter, but the really important part is that it's got that thermostatic switch in the plate. And the key there is that doesn't allow flow through the oil cooler until the oil temperature reaches a certain temperature. So once it reaches an operating temperature, then it opens and then it will start to flow oil through the cooler and start to cool the oil. But that's very important because oil has an operating window, too hot or too cold, and the oil is not going to do what it's supposed to do as far as lubricating the engine properly. And so you really want that thermostatic switch in there. There are some cheaper kits out there that don't include a thermostatic switch. They're just flowing oil through the cooler all the time. You can actually run the engine oil too cold, and you can wear out the motor prematurely by doing that. So we only sell the version with the thermostatic switch in it. Now the next thing that really helps out the cooling on the ND is increasing the amount of airflow that you can get in through the radiator. And when you look at a factory grill on the ND, you'll actually notice that the top half of the grill is actually not an opening. It's completely blocked off and it doesn't flow any air. Only the bottom half of the grill actually flows air into the radiator. Shortly after Mazda released the ND, they did a Spyder concept car to kind of show off some ideas that they had and different styling things. And one of the things on that car was this much more open style grill. This is a CarbonMiata grill, and this is styled much like the Spyder concept car's grill was. There's a version with no lights in it that we use on the track car. There's also a version of the same grill that has fog lights with a halo on them for a more GT inspired look. But the important thing about either of these grills is that the entire height of the grill is now open and helping to get air into the radiator. That about doubles the amount of airflow through the radiator. And that has proved really helpful on the ND. It's actually proved so helpful with cooling that this has actually become a standard part for every global MX5 Cup race car. Sticking with the theme of airflow for a moment, we'll shift our focus over to the transmission. Everybody knows that the ND transmission can be prone to some issues under hard use. And we won't unpack all the reasons for that in this video, but one thing that you can do to give your transmission the best chance at having a long and healthy life is to just make sure that the oil in it doesn't overheat. To that end, we've come up with a really simple way to achieve that. This is a one-piece formed aluminum plate, and it's an ND transmission air scoop. This mounts underneath the car, mounts to some factory locations that are under your car, and it just sits there with this little scoop, very low profile, that just scoops air that's coming underneath the car and directs it up and over and around the transmission case on the ND. That really helps the case shed heat out of the oil. Now on a race car, if we're building a full-on race car, we'll probably do the more extreme version of things, which is a proper fluid cooler. And that's going to include an external pump and lines and a cooler and all of that. But that's going to be way more cost and way more work than just about anybody with a standard sort of enthusiast sort of use for their car is really going to want to invest in this. So this is a really nice halfway point that is surprisingly effective. We've actually tested this to reduce the transmission temperature by 20 degrees. And so that's why I really think that this is kind of a no-brainer for every ND on the road. It's passive, it's got no moving parts, it's a 5-minute install. There's really no reason not to have it on the car, and it can really help keep that transmission temperature down. Now moving back to engine cooling, if the CarbonMiata Grille is not doing enough on its own for you, then you may need to upgrade the radiator. And for that, we have this really nice CSF all aluminum radiator. Now, this is a drop-in replacement for the factory radiator, and you'll notice that it's a cross-flow design, which is what the factory ND radiator style is. But this is actually a triple pass. So the coolant actually makes three passes through the radiator instead of just being a cross-flow from one side to the other, like the factory style. That's more time spent in the radiator for the coolant, and so therefore it's able to shed more heat. This also uses CSF's B-tube technology, so the tubes in here are their own design, and the fins are also specially designed with aerodynamics to be as efficient as possible. 31 millimeter core thickness. This radiator is our go-to choice if we need to upgrade the radiator in our ND for track use or any other sort of hard use. Now the next ND cooling mod is hood vents, and this is the Singular Motorsports Hood Louver Kit. Now, if I had to give a short version or explanation of how hood louvers work, the radiator, as well as any other coolers like an oil cooler, etc., that you might also have up in the nose there, their performance gets better and better the more air you're able to pass through the cooling cores, or the core of the radiator, for example. Now, shoving a bunch of air into the radiator is only half the puzzle. Also, getting the air out and providing an unrestricted path for that air that gets through the radiator to exit the vehicle is the other half of that equation. A good analogy is that's kind of like upgrading your bolt-ons on your motor. You do the intake to help get more air into the motor, but you also upgrade the exhaust to something that's less restrictive so that it's easier to get the air that's coming out of the motor. So much like that, you want to make sure that both your entry and your exit of your air through your cooling cores in the nose of the car is as unimpeded as possible. Now, when we're talking about airflow, one of the golden rules is that air always moves from a place of high pressure to a place of low pressure. And the Singular Motorsports hood louvers were designed by mapping the pressure gradient over the hood as the car is moving, finding the lowest pressure zones on the hood, and then creating vents for those areas. You've got a lot of high pressure underneath the hood because it's being fed by the exhaust from the radiator. And so then putting a vent in the low pressure zones on top of the hood gives you an effect that is really the vents sucking the air from inside the engine bay and exhausting it out. Now, the Singular kit comes with a template that sticks on the hood and shows you where to cut and drill. Comes with the louvers, some hardware, everything that you need, etc. The only reason that these are not on my list of something every single person with an ND should have on their car is, yes, you do have to cut the hood of your ND to install them. And I get it, that's not for everybody. But if you're doing a high performance build, something where you're going to be really pushing the car hard all the time, and you want to maximize the effectiveness of your radiator, this is an important piece to that puzzle. Now, the last thing to note is this very cool little guy from Moroso. Super simple tank, but it's beautifully TIG welded. This is their coolant reservoir replacement. So the factory coolant reservoir, and actually it still has the factory one on our track car here, but this one is plastic. This is the replacement, all aluminum. It's never gonna wear out. It's never gonna crack or anything like that. It also dresses up the engine bay really nicely. So now with everything that we've covered here, what are the must-dos? What's the most important that you should absolutely consider doing? I would say that the oil cooler is the first thing that you've got to consider. If you're going to do any kind of high performance driving, any sort of aggressive driving, really doesn't matter what the setting is, canyons, autocross, track use, the oil cooler is the first thing that should be on your list. I also think that anything that's passive, that just works with the airflow that's already happening around the car, is just a no-brainer. The CarbonMiata Grille just makes sense. There's no moving parts, there's nothing to go wrong, you're just making more use out of the air that's already hitting the front of the car. And in that same vein, the transmission air cooling scoop, there's no moving parts, it installs fast, and as soon as this is installed, this is a lifetime part, and it's blowing air on that transmission and helping keep everything running cool. This should be, and I think the CarbonMiata Grille should be on every ND out there. Do the version with the lights if you like that look, or do the version without the lights if you prefer that. But either way, work with the airflow that you've already got. It's a lot better than having to add a bunch of extra moving parts, a bunch more complexity. There are some times when that's appropriate, but these passive ways of increasing your cooling are really cool. No pun intended. If you've got any other questions, go to goodwinracing.com. We've got all of these parts listed on the website. We've got more info about each item on the website as well. And there's a contact us page on the website where you can shoot us an email or give us a call if you've got questions. We can talk about your car and specifically what you're doing and help you figure out the right parts for your build. Have a great day.